It seems pretty clear to me that the ground truth of our circumstance as conscious beings is first consciousness. The something seems to be happening.
What? So consciousness, which is something, seems to be happening. How many times have we eviscerated this stupid cogito? So he tries to go to some lame version of the cogito, just like Trent Horn, which, again, how do these people think this is a good argument? And why is it that every atheist, materialist, and even the goofus Muslims that we've debated, they have the exact same position and starting point? Empirical sense data, foundationalism. Molyneux, Trent Horn, T. Dump, Sam Harris, Azrar Rashid, Matt Dillahunty. Everyone making the same arguments and the same starting point. Not a one of them understanding what justification is.
There's an experiential character to this place. And this experience admits of a range of possibilities that we have all dimly discovered parts of this range. We have
nothing to do with justification. Speculating about the range of possible experiences that humans have and what science will figure it out one day. That has nothing to do with justification. He just doesn't understand what this question is and what it's asking for.
had excruciating experiences and sublimely happy experiences. And we are trying to navigate.
Nothing to do with justification. Nothing close to the notion of justification. I mean, it's like, yeah, I think he thinks just talking, right? This is what we saw, I think, in the debates. He did this, right? Sam Harris's version of an argument is you just kind of talk for a while.
Toward the latter and away from the former, and helplessly trying. It's like this is the values come in. Put your hand on a hot stove, you will discover your value to get your hand off of it.
Okay, so if values are merely instinctual reactions, that's not a value, because my instinctual reaction has no value. It just is. So he's done. I think Molyneux did this. Remember when we were debating? Molyneux was like, you're talking about taste. You're talking about touch. You're talking about taste. Touch and taste. What? No, I'm talking about the notion of justifying the belief that there's meaningful sense data, that there's data in your sense, that there's some corresponding, reaction between you and the external world that's meaningful and real. I mean, on and on. That's what I'm asking for. The justification for those assumptions for the knowledge claims. I'm not debating you on knowledge claims. I don't care about that because I'm not an evidentialist. I'm not going to grant you your worldview and your paradigm and argue with you over stupid evidences and the interpretation of evidences. I'm going to debate you on critiquing your presuppositions, your paradigm at a fundamental level. And when that's demolished, you can't argue.
Very early. You don't have to be reasoned into it. This is as incontrovertible as anything you can experience.
So he's just confusing desire, emotive responses, or intuitive, instinctual responses with values. So the fact that a species wants to survive or acts to survive has nothing at all to do with whether it should or ought to survive as a universal principle. Do you see how simple the argument and the question is? And Carroll will quickly and decisively call him on this.
There's certain things that you will just want to avoid. And so to take a more abstract picture, there is consciousness.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, I meant to say, Jim Bob, vegans are a great example of this, right? The vegans are over here on the one hand, their dissociative state is telling you that there's nothing but pure survival of the fittest, atheist matter in motion. And then the other alter schizo personality on the other side of their head is saying there's absolute moral, ethical requirements that you not use any animal products. When even though all of nature is full of the principle of animals eating and using animal products, suddenly that's a value judgment that we ought not do. So they're the classic modern example in the fringe of atheism, right? Because most of them are atheists, of deriving oughts from is. Great example. No better example, perhaps, than the atheist vegan cult.
There's the totality of actual and possible conscious minds that are open to this this range of conscious experience.
Okay, here's this just rambling, saying nothing.
The only thing I think I need to be a moral realist, and for science ultimately to be the framework in which we talk about right and wrong and good and evil, is to concede that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad.
Yeah. So the only thing I need for moral realism is that we should avoid the worst possible bad. And doesn't everybody agree that we should avoid the word worst possible bad? Therefore, I can derive and ought from it is amazing level of just pitiful non-argumentation from a public intellectual. It's kind of amazing, really, that this passes for being intellectual when I think most of us in this audience, right, you guys, can easily see why this does not count as justification. First of all, the fact that you think that this is all that's needed is totally irrelevant to the question of justification. That, again, doesn't matter. And to say that because most people want to avoid something is not a justification and not a value because it's begging the question. You are trying to derive an ought from an is and begging the question. By the way, on your worldview, everyone is determined by chemical processes to desire that. And also the people who desire the opposite are also determined by chemical processes to desire the opposite, to inflict pain, right? To endure pain. There are people who like this, they get off on it, right? Sexual weirdos, right? But on Sam Harris's view, there's no reason that one is better than the other because they're both encapsulated under pure determined chemical process. So if the good, and he's saying there is a good and a bad in his view, but if the good is just as chemically determined as the bad, it doesn't matter how many of the species, if 99% of the species prefers what he calls a good versus the 1% that prefers the bad, because the chemical reactions are just causing this. There's no actual ought or actual preference that's objective here, that you ought to do this. It's just what is. So in other words, there's no reason to prefer the bad from the good in this worldview. And if there's no reason to prefer one or the other, then he's not a moral realist. It's an arbitrary position for him to be a moral realist. It is ad hoc. It is unjustified, you see.
Right. If we should avoid anything, if we should do anything, we should get away from the worst possible misery for everyone.
Here you go. So here he brings in the oughts. We, making universal claims, all of us, presumably he means humans, ought to avoid the worst possible scenario. Not only is this begging the question, I mean, first of all, what is the worst? Who decides what's the criteria of avoiding the worst? Again, it begs the question. And then it begs the question again by saying that you ought to avoid the worst. What is the worst? What the species decides arbitrarily is the worst. Who? 50%? So there's like appeal to the masses fallacy to justify it. There's already the assumption of the worst. But this is a question about values. I'm asking for a justification for values at all. And he's saying, well, we look to the values. Literally. You see how silly this is.
Every other state of the universe is better than that. If words like
better, worst, so he's bringing in the value judgments, better and worst, when the question is about what is the scale for there to be better and worse, good and bad, which we've not gotten anything like that so far.
Good and bad and better and worse are going to mean anything, ever. Having every possible conscious mind suffer as much as it possibly can for as long as it can, to no good end, there's no silver lining, there's no lessons learned, this is just hell, right? That's bad and worth avoiding. And the answers as to how the minds involved would avoid this state.
All right, so I'm going to skip past his sort of filibustering and blathering on because it's just more of the same and nothing going anywhere, right? So let's get over here to Carroll's critique.
Paradigm.
Moral. And the meta-ethical question,
whether we've just been hung up on the meanings of words. And
by the way, notice he's going to use the word meta-ethical. How many times have you heard me use this word? How many atheists have said this is not a thing? I made it up. What? make this up. What are you talking about? It's all these idiots out here.
Oh, that's word salad. Meta ethics? That's word salad.
Or if you actually disagree.
Well, there's a little bit of gliding back and forth between what we call ethical questions and meta-ethical questions, right? Ethical questions on how we actually, what is right and wrong, what should we do, what is moral, and the meta-ethical questions on how do we set up a system for deciding what is ethical and so forth.
Now, did you see that category distinction between ethical questions and meta-ethical questions? How many times have you heard me explain this point ad nauseum to various atheists and opponents who act like there's no such thing as a paradigm level critique? There's no such thing as paradigm level, meta level questions. Okay, so there's no such thing as meta logic. There's no such thing as meta ethics. That's how stupid the people are. Like, go under the comments of the Matt Dillahunty debate on his channel. Go under the comments of the Matt Dillahunty debate on my channel. These people are completely stupid. No idea what they're talking about. Using very well-known terms in academia, and they say it's word salad, it's all made up. Now, they might perhaps try to argue the position that, well, there isn't actually anything meta-ethical, and then smush the two into the same type of thing, right? Oh, there's not actually meta-ethical problems because all problems are identical. They're all solved and known in the same way. A kind of grand narrative or unifying materialist type of approach. Again, if they want to make that move, let them do it, because that is one of the stupidest moves they'll make. And they'll fall into the notion of crackers in the pantry fallacy. Oh, really? So everything is proven in the same way through 5 cents data? Or how do you prove love through 5 cents data? How do you prove abstract concepts, math, through sense data? Is the way that you prove somebody's a murderer the same as the way that you prove a math problem? I mean, really? You want to be that dumb to say that everything is proven in the same evidentiary way? Of course it's not. This is so silly. And even in the debate, Matt Dillahunty admitted not everything is proven in the same way. Okay, oh, wait a minute. So not everything is proven in a reductionistic empiricist way. Okay, so what's the proof for the transcendental categories that you said you believe in? There is no proof. They just are. And people literally think that Matt won that debate when that's what he said.